What can I say more about Monkey Island that everybody else in the world hasn't already said, especially recently in a quite long video that covered the entire series? The secret of Monkey Island is a legendary game, and not because it sold bajillions and gajillions of copies like the games that sell millions of copies routinely in the last couple of years that nobody really plays or remembers all that well, or had any sort of influence on anybody or anything. But it is legendary in the sense that anybody that's ever played it knows it, even now, remembers it quite fondly because it latches onto you. It digs in deep because it has several qualities that make it absolutely shine as an adventure game and positively glow as a game in general, as a piece of art. And make no mistake, if anybody ever tells you that games aren't art, for one, they're wrong. They are. As wrong as a person that's wrong can ever be wrong. But if they want an example, then just show them Monkey Island. Any of them, honestly. The first one preferably. And if they still can't get it through their heads, remind them what kind of art Hollywood is producing, because, you know, all those movies are art as well. All of them. And if they still haven't reconsidered, they're a replicant. Inform the authorities. Monkey Island was made in the golden age of 1990. Remember that year? The first year of freedom. No more communism. People here in my neck of the woods would not be able to enjoy Monkey Island until much later. We were a bit busy with everything falling apart and everything being stolen, like it still is today. The secret of Monkey Island was the brainchild of a man named Ron Gilbert. He wanted to make a game about pirates in the Caribbean, but he couldn't do it alone, now could he? So he got a couple of his friends together, all of them working at LucasArts back then, or Lucasfilm Games. They were Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman, and together, along with a couple of musicians and artists to draw things, they created a masterpiece. And it's a game that was made in a way that games usually are not made. A lot of the dialogue in the game was made up on the spot as it was being entered into the game. It's the improvisational work of a bunch of people that really knew what they were doing, that really had a common vision for a game, and had the talent to pull it off. Sort of like the original Ghostbusters movie was. And it's very important that these people made it, because you can see their talent in there. Without them, all of them, or at least some of them, you really wouldn't get the same effect, now would you? It would be like somebody making a new Ghostbusters movie with a lot of improvisation in it and no clue what to actually do with it. You get the 2016 Ghostbusters or Paradox's Empire, which I believe had some improvised dialogue in it, otherwise I can't explain why it was so awful and unfunny. But Monkey Island was a blast. As a comedy, it is phenomenal. And mind you, comedies are hard. To make something that will constantly keep people laughing, that's not easy. Drama's easy. Making a tearjerker is goddamn easy. I could tell you what I did in 2015 and you'd be crying right now. But to make you laugh, that takes effort. That takes skill. And he had that in Monkey Island. But there was more to it than just that. The version you're seeing on the background is the final of the old versions. It's the complete, I think, VGA version of the game. There were some previous ones with low resolutions, with uglier sprites, but this is the one that most people remember. It's the one they could play for almost 20 years, until the remake came that added its own graphic style. It also added voices to the characters, which were not present in the original game, since this was before the time when Lucas could actually do that. I mean, LucasArts. George Lucas is in the game as well. He shows up as an Easter egg, or as a red herring if you will. And it's important that a game looks like this. It's not really all that beautiful in terms of detail, in terms of general aesthetics. It is a simplistic game in terms of graphics, but there's something endearing to it. There's something charming to it, as simplistic as it looked. Now mind you, the second one looks way better and it's a lot more atmospheric, but you can't really say that it looks bad, especially when you get to see close-ups of the characters, which in this version are represented by actual artwork from the the development of the game, not just, well, really crude sprites as you would have seen in the first version. And what's more important is that it sounds right. It sounds right thanks to Michael Land's beautiful Monkey Island medley and to all the music that's in there made by other people like Patrick Mundy as well. The game just feels right in the way it looks, in the way it sounds, and in the way it plays. This was still in the age where we had the big selection of verbs to use in the environment. It was before we got the hand of more contextual type of controls, but this also meant that you could use those verbs on things you weren't supposed to and get hilarious effects, funny descriptions. And what's more important than this is that Monkey Island didn't really behave like a normal adventure game. Now, the genre at this point was, in terms of graphical adventure games, was around 7 years old. It was under a decade old, which to us now may not seem like a lot, but it kinda is. It's enough for a general idea of what the genre is to be formed in everybody's subconscious. It's like we're going through now with the Battle Royale genre. We all know what it is. Half of us hate it, or at least a constant shoving of it in our faces at every turn and inserting it in every game. And we kinda wanna see if they're gonna make them. We wanna see something that's a bit different. When Monkey Island was, then it's way different. It is in a class that is actually quite rare and not really all that populated, that of a parody of a satire game that is still absolutely part of the genre it's trying to parody, and it is a phenomenal game within that genre, even if you don't understand that it is a parody, that it is meant in part as satire. I think one of the closest games we've gotten to this level of understanding of a genre would be Spec Ops The Line, with the problem that Spec Ops The Line is kind of boring to play, honestly, and that's part of the idea of it. That was part of the point of the game, but the message sort of outweighed the actual enjoyment of playing it. In Monkey Island, since it doesn't deal with a subject that white phosphorus killing everybody delicate, there's a lot more room for enjoyment, for fun, for a game that is good on its own and a parody of the genre it's part of. Now, why would I say it's a parody? Well, remember when this was made, the biggest games in the genre back then were the King's Quest series, were the Sierra Online games, the Police Quest, even Leisure Suit Larry Away. Those were the big ones. Yes, Lucas had made a bunch of video games in that genre up until then. They had made the Maniac Mansion, which was the reason why the technology for Monkey Island exists. They had made Zack McCracken, and I think Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. And these games, or at least the few of them that I played and still remember, did still conform to the Sierra Online recipe, where you could die, you could get lost, you could pretty much screw yourself over and not really know why. Monkey Island was built from its core with the idea of rejecting all that, with the idea of making an adventure game that wasn't about racking your brain trying to figure out the complete absurdist moon logic that the developer expected from you. Not to say that the game was not crazy. Monkey Island was super crazy. The entire series is, that's the point of it. But the craziness has a logic to it. Do you want to use a cannon to be shot out of? Okay, you're gonna need a helmet. Can't find a helmet? Get a pot. You can fit a pot on your head, right? It makes sense in a sort of, well, not even twisted, but imaginative way. There's a rope that's connecting two islands. Well, here's a chicken with a pulley in the middle. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, but it's not hard to make the connection. And the game will constantly make jokes about these kinds of instances, one of the best ones possible being a completely non-interactive fight scene where your character just starts grabbing items off screen and using them off screen in totally dumb, ridiculous ways. Well, dumb if you haven't played the King's Quest series. There's some puzzles in there that are just kind of, they make the one with Professor Shinetop's fight from behind the wall seem logical. The Secret of Monkey Island was also a game where you could not lose. You had no fail state other than the one that you would create for yourself if you could not get past a puzzle, which is still a failstate if you're wondering if you try to find a game via failstates, that counts as one, because the game issued a challenge and you failed it, whereas not wanting to press a W key, that doesn't mean you failed, just that you refuse to acknowledge that yes, there's a game, which I wholeheartedly appreciate. No matter what's anything you could do in the game, like fall off a cliff, shoot yourself out of a cannon, Guybrush Threepwood would always emerge unscathed, whole. This allowed you to do a lot of exploration. It allowed you to enjoy this world without any sort of nagging feeling that, oh, if I take this step, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna have to save and reload a save. None of that. It's just pure enjoyment, pure fun, no stress. Just the experimentation of trying to learn the secrets of this topsy-turvy Caribbean fantasy world with ghosts and pirates and the occasional three-headed monkey. There were also a lot of references in the game, but Monkey Island did references differently than you would see in a lot of modern media where it's just, hey, there's that thing you know from somewhere else. It was a bit more subtle, like the way it inserted George Lucas into the game, or the way it inserted Loom into the game as a pirate in a bar talking about Loom. The game could do that because in a way it was aware it was a game. Yeah, no, that's another thing that's quite popular these days, where the game knows it's a game and it tries to make you think that it's a game and sort of plays with that idea. Monkey Island did that too, where you'd constantly see, well, evidence that this was a game. Certain names, especially Monkey Island, had a TM next to them. Characters would sometimes break role just to exposit something, or to tell you to just go with it because it's a game. It did it in a way that felt natural, that fit, because it doesn't have the setup of a world that's serious, that takes itself serious at all. Instead, it's a light-hearted adventure that has really loose laws about what actually is happening in it, what is allowed to happen, to what degree everything is real, where you play as an idiot that wants to be a pirate. Well, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Guybrush isn't really at the same level of idiot as Roger Wilco. Though they are a bit similar, you have to admit they are quite similar, and Roger Wilco is a lot older than Guybrush in terms of when the games were released. And you also probably know the legend that he gets his name from Guy.Brush. There's two mechs in Tabula Rasa, one called Dude, another one called Brush. I sort of thought this was a reference to him, I'm not sure. And to accomplish your feat, you will have to do all sorts of zany puzzles and explore this world, this game, that will sometimes tell you to insert disc, I don't know, what was it, 58, because you found a labyrinth underground. I think they took that out in one of the versions because people kept asking where can I find the extra disc. And to become a pirate, you had to complete certain tasks like retrieving an idol that will eventually get you almost around in one of the best puzzles ever. And another sign that the game is a game. It works on video game logic, where you kind of have to realize that you're carrying that thing in your pants, in your magic pants, so why not just pick it up, put it back in your pants and get out of the water. I mean, you've been holding things in your pants that were just impossibly heavy. You should not be able to move with all those things in your pants, because this is a game. Don't overthink it. Just enjoy it. And you did absolutely get to enjoy this story with these characters, because they have something that a lot of adventure games lack in the last couple of years. It was kind of a dark age. Not sure if we're still in it. I haven't really played a lot of it. Well, there haven't been a lot of adventure games coming out, apart from the Telltale ones, which I really don't count because they're not this anymore. They haven't been this in a while. Monkey Island had wit in the writing, in the humor. It had wit, cleverness. Actual damned cleverness. It wasn't just poo jokes or referential humor that quickly becomes so grating that, oh my god, if I hear another referential joke in a game, I swear I am going to complain about it on the internet. Not to say that there wasn't the odd reference in Monkey Island. Again, there's the George Lucas one, for example, but the way they do it, that's the difference. You can be smart about it or just say something about Chuck Norris with no context in the game's world. Still looking at you, Seville. Still looking at you. And through the course of the game, you would learn from these characters different things, like how to become a true swordsman, which doesn't really require you necessarily knowing how to wield a sword all that well, but it does require you to really like insulting people in creative ways. The insult sword fighting component is masterfully done. You go around the island collecting insults and replies to those insults, essentially beating them into submission by giving them the intellectual version of a yo mama joke. But when you get to actually fight the final boss, you realize, oh, nothing that I actually know fits with what Clara's saying, or does it? Yes, it's a game where you can try everything ad infinitum, but if you actually pay attention, if you actually understand language, humor, then that fight becomes perfect. It's a dialogue battle. It's a puzzle that requires you to read, process the words, and figure out which of them would make the best comeback possible, the best insult. That's the kind of puzzle you don't really see much in video games. Honestly, the last one that I saw that had something similar was Grey Matter, made by Jane Jensen, who also made the Gabriel Knight series. And that was about 10 years ago. Now, instead you get adventure games that have, at best, hidden object games in them as gameplay. They have, the puzzle type puzzles that are Sudoku or the Tower of Hanoi or the kind of crap I used to put in my contests, my ARG contests that I used to organize about once a year and didn't really put much effort into. What I'm saying is, puzzle design really went downhill, and I blame Myst for it, to be honest. That and the moon logic of the King's Quest games, and the rise of Facebook games, and horribly thought out puzzles for tablet games. Even Broken Sword made that mistake. Broken Sword already had some components that were a bit, minigame-ish puzzles, not, interesting puzzles, but the remastered version just ruined it. So back to Monkey Island. Something else that set it apart was the way the story unfolded. You were technically the main character, but you weren't really the hero. The hero, the competent person that actually did a lot of things, was Elaine Marley, the governor of this island and a bunch of other islands. She had a plan, she had a way of getting rid of LeChuck, the ghost pirate, the fiendish, evil pirate that haunted the seas and vowed to one day marry Elaine. Well, turns out that even if you weren't there, she would have pretty much done away with him. She had things covered, while you mostly bungle your way through and almost ruin everything. But you're not really totally incompetent. I mean, you do start out as a bright-eyed novice, but eventually you do become experienced in the art of piratry, of sword fighting, of defeating ghosts with root beer, I believe it was. Whole ending with the two lovers, one of which for 99% of the game never had the actual courage to talk to the other one, getting together and confessing under the moonlit stars at night that you should never pay more than $20 for a video game. Words to live by even now. There is very little you can do to the Secret of Monkey Island to improve it. Well, you could simplify the interface and add better graphics and voice acting, which, yeah, that's kind of what I did with the remastered version, but there's nothing you can change to make it better in terms of gameplay, in terms of design, in terms of story, in terms of characters, in terms of writing, in terms of mood, setting, music. Well, you can improve the music a bit, but there is nothing you can do to it, nothing you can change, nothing you can remove, nothing you can add that will make it fundamentally better than it already is. And you know what that means, right? It means it's perfect. It is a perfect game. It embodies exactly what it was meant to embody, and it does it flawlessly. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not overly long. It's not overly dramatic. It's not grating. It's just right. But if you did want more of it, you could get so much more of it in the coming years. If you want to play Monkey Island, you can find the game everywhere. The Secret of Monkey Island has been re-released in the remastered version that still lets you play with the original music and the original graphics. It even lets you use voices for the old style game, and that is a masterful work of art, honestly. The way they did the integration there is just superb. So whichever version you play, go for it. You will not be disappointed. There is absolutely no reason for you to be. The Monkey Island series is odd on its own. It features many odd concepts, many odd ideas, many odd characters, and the oddest game of them all is without a doubt Monkey Island 2. Why would I say that? Well, several reasons. It is the only one to have a number in its name. All the other ones are something of Monkey Island, or at the very least from a Monkey Island. None of them have a number. None of them are billed as a sequel, but this one is. This isn't Escape from Monkey Island, this is not Tales of Monkey Island, this is not The Curse of Monkey Island. This is Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge. And yet, even though it is a sequel, it is the one that behaves the least like a sequel. And it also sold the least in the entire series. Now when I say that it behaves the least as a sequel, think about how a sequel is made, especially how a sequel made just 1 month after the development of the first one is made. You jump right into it and basically do the exact same thing, but with a new setting, some new lines of dialogue, a couple of new characters, let's say a different story, and everything else is the same. That's how a sequel usually gets made, and it's not necessarily a bad idea. Fallout 2 was that, and Fallout 2 is one of the best games ever made. But Monkey Island 2 didn't do that. The first Monkey Island was a parody of the adventure game genre first and foremost. And it featured its own unique ideas. It had things like insult sword fighting. But the second one, although it has plenty of callouts to the first game, and it's still in a sort of a universe that is aware that it exists as a game, is more of an adventure game in its own right than it is a parody of the genre. It is still self-aware, but it doesn't go that extra mile that the first one went. Instead, it goes several miles deep underground, where it bubbles in the magma layer of the earth, and then comes roaring out as, well, as Monkey Island 2. A game that, although uses the same characters, the same basic setup as the first one, you can't call it a rehash of the first one. It tries so much to be original. It even gave Guybrush a beard to make him look cooler, and he is more competent in this one. He would be, wouldn't he? He just defeated the ghost pirate LeChuck, a story that he tells to everybody to the point where everybody wants him to shut up, and he often says that people wouldn't know a good story if they paid $60 for it, which may be a jab at the fact that when it was released, Monkey Island 1, The Secret of Monkey Island, did not have maybe the best reception in terms of sales a game could ever have, and you'll actually find peppered out through the game all sorts of dialogue lines that seem to be describing Ron Gilbert more than Guybrush, or the game more than a situation that's in the game. There's still that meta aspect of it, just as the original one had, but it tries a bit harder to be its own game, to the point where it removes insult sword fighting. Now, insult sword fighting is synonymous with Monkey Island. It is something that you would find in just about every other game in the series, or at least a variant of it. They all had a gimmick like that. Not this one. Monkey Island 2 didn't. It was not a rehash of an idea. It was not trying to just redo what worked, what was popular, to be the same thing again. No, it tried to do something different. And one way that it is the way in which you explore the environment. After you were done with your initial, let's say, adjustment to the game by exploring Scab Island, you are now able to traverse between 2 other islands and come back to the first one, where you would find new things to do as you explored and tried to uncover the secret of the mysterious, the mythical, the unknown treasure of Big Whoop. Whereas in Monkey Island 1, you would just explore one island and then another one. Here you got to choose in which way you would want to navigate through your surroundings. You would sail from place to place and do things involving sending people to jail sometimes, because Guybrush Threepwood is kind of a bastard. Well, he is a pirate, why wouldn't he be a bastard? They all are. And one other major change that the game made was, well, honestly, one that may be a bit polarizing and not all that great. It features a Monkey Island 2 light mode, which is, as the game calls it, a game mode designed for video game reviewers. In this mode you have fewer puzzles, and the ones that exist are somewhat easier to complete or even complete themselves automatically. This is a mode that, although can be very useful to people that are just getting into the genre because it simplifies some of the challenge of the game, it is never a substitute for the full experience of Monkey Island 2, because the game as it was designed in its full version is complete. Whenever you take something out of it, you take something out of all of it. If you remove a puzzle, if you remove a way in which a puzzle is completed, you remove the context for its joke, and so you remove the joke itself. Some would say that Monkey Island's puzzles are just an excuse to create funny situations, and they're not wrong. And the light version of it compromises the humor by removing some of those funny situations. You no longer have reasons to do some stupid things, and thusly you are robbed of the full experience of the game. I know it can be a bit frustrating to play a game that tends to sometimes be a bit out there in terms of the logic of its puzzles, but figuring them out was rewarding unto itself, with the humor it had, with the inevitable crazy consequences. The light version just takes away from that. Though at the same time, you kind of have to appreciate what they did. Essentially, it is two games in one. Although another way this could have been done is by implementing multiple solutions to each puzzle, or at least to most of them, with one of them being a bit more straightforward, another one being a bit crazy. This way it will also fit in with the dialogue, where you can say things that are reasonable and then just tell characters, oh hi, we met in the previous game. But that's not something that adventure games really do, mostly because making multiple solutions for puzzles tends to be a bit tricky and take a lot of time. Though to be fair, the puzzles in Monkey Island are great. I mean, the entire series, for the most part, has puzzles that will reward you if you finish them. Whereas some games will use the tired old use a penny as a screwdriver to open a vent grate, or slide a paper under the door to knock the key on the paper so you can open the door, and then have nothing to show for it in terms of, you know, payoff. It's just something you've seen a billion times before, done again and again and again. Monkey Island has you nail somebody into a coffin. To be fair, it's Stan, he kinda deserves it. He didn't sell necessarily the best ships ever made. What I'm saying, it never gets boring. It never gets stale. It is always entertaining and weird. Monkey Island 2 is by far the weirdest of the bunch. It is so weird that not only does it make references to the first game as though it were a game, but when things happen that flash back in a way or another to the first game, it does so with the first game's graphics, presented alongside the graphics of the current game. And that's not even the weirdest part. No, the weirdest part is at the end. Monkey Island was the brainchild of Ron Gilbert. He had an idea for it, a direction for it. He had an answer to exactly what is the secret of Monkey Island, and not just the one that he made up and told to others that then may have or may not have ended up in some of the games later on. He had an answer for what happens at the end of this game, because at the end of this game, spoilers for a game that was released 27 years ago, you wind up in an amusement park with Guybrush just being a kid, with LeChuck being his brother, with his parents there, and realizing it was all just a fantasy. But was it? Because Chucky turns a bit voodoo-ish at the end. It leaves you with a mystery. That also technically makes Monkey Island 2 the last canonical Monkey Island game. There's 5 games in the series. Well, technically there's 6 with a phantom 5th, but none of them are Ron Gilbert's vision. Sure, he had some input on them, but they're not the games that he made, that he wrote, that he envisioned. But Monkey Island 2 is, and you can see it. You can see that he had an idea, because it's not just the first one again. I know I've repeated this time and time again, but it is worth saying. Most of the Monkey Island games are the first one in some form or another again, often with bits from the second one as well. But in that process of being parts of something else, they lose a bit of originality. And if it wasn't for the later ones using vastly varied and different graphic styles, they would have honestly very little identity of their own. But we will get to those in the next couple of weeks. For me, Monkey Island 2 is the best of the bunch. It felt the most as its own adventure game, with wit, with character, with superb location, with an eerie atmosphere even in certain places like the graveyard. And the soundtrack was phenomenal. Even just the old MIDI one, the one that you hear most commonly, you know, without having to shell out for CD versions or something else. The one that's built in, the one powered by the iMuse system, is absolutely exquisite. It's a system that they couldn't even replicate for the re-release version when they remade the game in 2010, I believe, or 2011, because the system was built from the ground up to work with different types of instruments in MIDI format, where the game would just switch between instruments as you move from location to location, creating one continuous song that just blended into itself in different variants and different tonalities until it became a different song. But you would be hard-pressed to notice an abrupt, sudden change. Everything was smooth as the graphics, well, were back in the day. I know it may not look like it's exquisite by today's standards, but even when I played it, it wasn't all that long ago. It was 2005 or 2004 at the earliest. It still looked great. A bit cluttered in places, especially because you have to do some pixel hunting from time to time, but it was still beautiful. Beautiful in that pixelated, MIDI-drenched, old LucasArts style. There is beauty there. A beauty that you too can appreciate if you want to play the game again. So go play it. You will never regret this deeper dive into Monkey Island, into what it means, into its world, into its characters, into its themes. You will not regret playing a game that I personally believe outshines the first one. And mind you, the first one was perfect. I don't believe there was ever a game with a better title than this one, The Curse of Monkey Island. It is not just meant to signify the curse that befell Guybrush in the previous game or the curse that befell Elaine in this game. It is the curse of the existence of the previous two games upon this game, for it will forever be tainted by their existence. The Curse of Monkey Island is a fine adventure game. Were it in its own series, where it's separate from all the ones that came before it, it would have been a fantastic, superb game that everybody would have loved for what it was. But because it is part of a series that has had so far two of the best adventure games ever made, it will always fall short. And honestly, the reason why it falls short is that it always tries to follow those games up. It always tries to give you a bit of the same. It tries to be familiar. It tries to make itself feel like Monkey Island, like you know Monkey Island is. And had it not done that, had it embraced, well, pretty much what everything else is already there, I believe it would have been a better game. The Curse of Monkey Island was made in the year 1997. It is not helmed by pretty much any of the people that worked on the previous two games. Ron Gilbert at this point was no longer working at LucasArts. Neither was Dave Grossman. Tim Schafer was the only one left, and he did have some input on the development of the game, but he was busy working on the masterpiece that was Grim Fandango at the time. It was helmed by people that had not really done much in terms of defining what Monkey Island was. And in a way, that could have been a fantastic thing, but they tried to make it a lot like the previous Monkey Island games, at least in terms of the way it's designed, in terms of its structure. Because in terms of its presentation, it is completely out there. Yes, you still had the music by Michael Land, superb soundtrack, excellent, still had iMuse, now with the added bonus of there being a song you could participate in, with a really neat puzzle that involves you trying to insert the word orange at the end of a verse, so the goddamn pirates would stop singing and get back to work. That was an excellent puzzle. That was something you would have not found in the previous games, because, you know, they didn't have music. Well, Monkey Island 2 did have that one song, but it wasn't interactive. This was the next step. This was beyond it. This was the spark of brilliance the game could have had. And the art direction. Bill Tiller's backgrounds are instantly recognizable as being only Bill Tiller's backgrounds, and mostly for being in The Curse of Monkey Island. Now, he has made 2 other adventure games that I know of, which do have similar styles, but they're all 3D-ish. Those games are Vampire Story, which honestly looks amazing, and I still regret that it did not get a sequel or at least a prequel. And the other game is Ghost Pirates of Vuju Island, which can't say I really enjoyed all that much, even though it did try and imitate the Monkey Island formula. That actually probably was not in its favor, whereas A Vampire Story was utterly unique, and it used Bill Tiller's style to enrich it. Ghost Pirates of Vuju Island seemed kind of derivative. Also, I think the translation may have been a bit weird. At least I imagine there was a translation, because parts of the game didn't make really that much sense. I keep imagining it being originally in German for some reason. And if it wasn't, then well, the game had some issues. So back to The Curse of Monkey Island. You can't confuse it with the previous games. It looks like its own game. It looks like no other LucasArts adventure game. While you could confuse some bits from Monkey Island to, for example, with bits from Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, due to the sprite artwork being quite similar at times, this looked unique. It looked beautiful. Okay, the characters may have looked a bit too weird, and honestly I wasn't all that mad about how Guybrush looked in this game, but still it looked like something you are not bound to see all that often. And the rest of the game never takes advantage of that. Yeah, it has voices. No other Monkey Island game before it had voices. And the voice cast does a bang-up job. And the dialogue is still pretty much around the same level as the previous Monkey Island games, I'd say. It still breaks the fourth wall. You still travel back to previous editions of the series. You actually end up in the tree stump that was in the maze in Monkey Island 1, and it's done with Monkey Island 1's graphics, just like the Monkey Island 2 joke. And it do have references to the game being a sequel and maybe, you know, not being all that successful as a series, just like the previous games did. And there's a reference to another LucasArts adventure game, just like there was in the first one. And there's insult sword fighting, only now with rhymes. And at the end, when you have to actually use them, you realize that pretty much everything you've learned was actually wrong, and now you have to figure out how to... that's also what the other one did. But you do have a fighting at sea component with your ship, which you can choose to play it in an easy way or a more difficult way. You can even upgrade the cannons on your ship to make your job easier. But quality-wise, it is kind of under Sid Meier's Pirates that was released a decade earlier, so setting it on easy and just breezing through it, not a bad idea. Apart from that bit and the bit of the song that also takes place in that chapter of the game, The Curse of Monkey Island is highly derivative. And it is derivative in one of the worst ways possible. It tries to emulate the old ones, but fails at finding what made the old ones great. Like one of the funniest puzzles in Monkey Island 1, as I said, was the bit where you get drowned, or you're tied to an idol and thrown into the sea. What's funny about that is that there are all those items that could be used to tie the rope, but they're just out of reach. When the solution is a game solution, one that cannot exist in real life. You just pick up the idol and stuff it in your pants. Voila. That's brilliance. The Curse of Monkey Island does it twice, and it does it like in quick succession. The first time it does it is with the snake. Guybrush is eaten by a snake, which is an absolutely funny thing that happens. Make no mistake, the game is bonkers funny. You will laugh out loud numerous times. It's a superb comedy. But when you're in the snake and you see all those items around you that Guybrush cannot reach, like a snake clubbing club, think to yourself, okay, this puzzle is gonna be neat. This puzzle's probably gonna involve me doing something like just walking out of the head of the snake or opening a door that's in the snake's belly, or something stupid like that. No, it's an item combination puzzle based on the items you find in the snake's belly. Oh, and an item that you found by automatically picking it up right before you got eaten by the snake. There's no joke there. There's no cleverness there. It's just some puzzle. It could have been an epic puzzle if at least it was done in the same vein as in the first game. I mean, it's already derivative. At least prove that it's derivative for the same reason that the first one was brilliant. You know, be brilliant. Be out of there. But it wasn't. unpleasant. And right after you're spat out by the snake as you made it vomit, you get thrown into quicksand, in which again you have to combine items in your inventory, pick up a different sharp little thing to stuff into a reed to blow at a balloon, because you couldn't use the pin that was already in your inventory since you probably needed it later. Also, Gabriel said it was too small. You have to pick up a similar item that's right next to you, and then use some cockamamie thing with a helium balloon you had from the start for some reason. Well, you had it from the start because it's funny to talk with a squeaky voice. I should know. I've done it for years. And you combine that balloon with a rock and then send it floating out towards a rope or a vine, instead of, you know, doing something that would have been a bit better, a bit cleverer, a bit more Monkey Island than just any other adventure. Like, one cool way would have been, as you're trying to solve the puzzle the way the game, you know, hints you should do with the balloon and the rock just goes flying away like it does at first and never comes back, but the snake falls over dead and you can use it as a bridge. Like, the puzzle auto-solves itself and just makes that entire kind of ludicrous combination of Moonman logic item fiddling completely pointless. That would have been a great joke, because at its core, that's all the series ever was. An excuse to tell good jokes via puzzles. Puzzles that were insane, but, you know, were funny enough and out there enough that it made sense. And it even tries a sort of watered down version of the action scene you never see in the first Monkey Island game on Skull Island, though. Skull Island is probably the best bit of the Curse of Monkey Island. It's short as hell, but it's amazing. You keep hearing about Skull Island, and when you see it, you are not prepared to see it. You are not prepared for what you're about to see. And also, that is where Guybrush straight up murders someone. It was ludicrously funny. Again, the game is fantastically funny, just not mechanically funny, especially if you play it in the Mega Monkey mode. The thing it did well this time around, compared to the previous one, was the way it handled difficulty. On the standard difficulty, you get the full experience of the game. In the Mega Monkey mode, you get a bunch of fiddly extra steps to do your puzzles. Steps that are a bit annoying and sometimes kind of hard to understand. And I don't actually recommend you play it in that mode. The capture is made from that mode, and I used the walkthrough because I forgot some things, like you're supposed to slap Cutthroat Bill a couple of times to get a piece of hard candy that would have otherwise already been on the floor. It is absolutely meant to be a challenge, so I really can't fault the developers for that. It's just that the challenge involves doing some extra steps that aren't all that clear, and I rely mostly on you using everything on everything and eventually getting it right. But it is still a better way to do this than what Monkey Island 2 did, which was they just cut out or simplified puzzles to the point where the joke was no longer there in the easier version. Sure, that was made as a slight to game critics, but still it cheapened the experience a bit for the people that played it that way the first time around. And you always wanted to play it the best time the first time around, because that is when you will always best appreciate it, the first time. The first impression is always very important. And this is the third game in the series. That first impression, that counted for a lot. So technically, this was the first one I played in the series. I didn't get around to playing the first two ones until much later. Still, I like the game. I enjoy it. But it's not as good as the first two. Especially with what it does with Elaine. She is, well, I wouldn't say fridged. She's statued for the entire game. She appears in the intro, then after you cure her, she gets tied up and then vanishes and apparently saves your life off screen by rejiggering the controls for the roller coaster that would have led you to a pit of lava and killed you. And then that's it. But hey, Stan's still here and Guybrush continues to be an absolute asshole to him. Guybrush is so mean in these games, you realize after a while. He is downright evil at some points. Again, I believe he straight up murders somebody in this game. He also commits suicide like twice, or pretends suicide. The game is in the habit of making you repeat things. It's not one of its best qualities. It has been 3 years since the release of The Curse of Monkey Island. 3 years in which LucasArts went through a lot of changes. 3 years since the adventure game genre at large went through a lot of changes. Gone were the days when a simple 2D game would do. For this was the age of 3D, the age in which characters could no longer just be simple 2D sprites moving around the screen. Now they had 3D models that could turn and it could be seen from every angle possible. And the backgrounds themselves, they were not fully 2D anymore. Yes, technically they were still 2D because the processing power wasn't yet there for most people to render a 3D scene completely, in an efficient way at least, or at least in a way that'll make it look beautiful, but they were made up to look like they were 3D, usually actually modeled in 3D and then pasted in a 2D way in a world that made it look like it was still 3-dimensional. And when crossing that boundary from 2-dimensional to 3D mixed with 2.5D, Escape from Monkey Island managed to keep a lot of what made the previous game unique in a way. Bill Tiller's art could still be seen in the way the clouds look and the way some of the scenery looked, but the characters could no longer look as bizarre as they did in the previous game, at least not on the PC, because for some reason the PC version had lower resolution models than the PlayStation 2 version, because this was a game also released for the PlayStation 2. Not the first one, no, the PlayStation 2. And it sort of shows that consoles were a bit of an idea when the development of this game started out. Not to say that I'm blaming the controllers entirely on console, no. Grim Fandango also had the same problem with it having tank controls. That was the way in which people believed that 3D games would go, that everybody would accept the tank controls and would always use them, which is why stuff like Grim Fandango was initially a bit of a pain to play, but still it was an amazing game. For some reason I had for a while this strange memory that somehow Escape from Monkey Island had mouse controls too, no, but no. What I was remembering is that apart from tank controls, it also had the ability to control a character from the point of view of the camera, so you would no longer move Guybrush around by turning him and then hoping you were going in the right direction. You could just move left and right and he would move left and right on the screen. And to me at that time, it seemed like as big of an improvement as mouse control would be over the standard tank controls. But you can sort of see the consoleization of the game in some of the features added to it, well, mainly on one feature to which I'll get to soon. Monkey Island 4, as some people have pointed out, exists simply because Monkey Island 3 sold well in Germany. Otherwise, this game has no reason to exist. There wasn't an overarching story to be told, there wasn't a need to continue the story. And in many ways, it kind of shows what some would call them retcons, some would call them errors, some would call them finagling around trying to fit a character from the previous games in a different setting than he was previously established as being part of. It also disregards bits of the previous games as it pleases to fit its new narrative. One that is not bad, one that works. It works as a general joke at the silliness of the entire series, namely that one of the throwaway characters you found in the first Monkey Island turned out to be a really important character that probably you should have not left alone on an island. Then again, you also meet the other people you left alone on an island, trapped, imprisoned, who are now very scared of you because odds are you will do the same thing to them again. Because let's face it, Guybrush is an awful human being. Escape from Monkey Island tries at first to mimic Monkey Island 2 a bit, in the sense that you're not thrust into a conflict with LeChuck again from the get-go. No, you have a different villain. Not a Largo Legrand, not a former lackey of LeChuck, but a new character, one that is in a way tied to this game's interpretation of the lore of Monkey Island, of the series I mean, not the island itself. You're up against an Australian, one who is introduced in a very, very menacing way. He is the doom of pirates, the bane of the Caribbean, but not because he's some super strong Saxton Hale type character, but no. It's because he is a master of insulting people. And he insults people in Australian ways, meaning that most often the people he's insulting have no idea what he's saying, but they feel insulted and have no idea how to respond. And because in the intervening time between Monkey Island 3 and 4, it's not just about insult sword fighting, everything has become an insult-driven competition. Even arm arm wrestling, this man, this Australian, this Aussie mandrill has almost taken over the Caribbean with a single-minded objective, that of cleaning it of pirates, going as far as to brainwash pirates into deprogramming them in order to better serve, well, not society, but serve him as staff in his tourist traps. It's a game about gentrification, about kicking out the dirty old poor pirates that used to live there and replacing them with sushi bars. It's about taking out the scum bar out of Melee Island and replacing it with the Lua bar, which is actually a joke that works on multiple levels because the game doesn't use the scum engine anymore like the previous games. It doesn't use the scripting language that was built into scum. It uses Lua, which is both a scripting language and a type of festive type of thing from places. Involves beaches and limbos and fruity drinks, I think. What I'm getting at is that there's a layer there of comedy that's unique to this game. Australian-based comedy, gentrification-based comedy. It has its own core, as you would say. But it is an adventure game and is one part of the Monkey Island series that is incredibly superfluous. It is the weakest because it doesn't really do much with that core. And while it is still a funny game, it is absolutely fun. I mean, the bit with the duck, that's hilarious. It doesn't have as many laugh out loud, fall off your chair, roll around in pain moments as the previous ones. And that's not just referring to the dialogue, because dialogue is funny, it's still funny. Again, not super duper funny, but you have moments like talking to a bunch of lawyers trying to tell them lawyer jokes and realizing they don't understand why lawyers are horrible people. And then when you open your inventory next to them, they comment about you not having any money because the inventory is now 3D and it's presumed that you throw things around and then pick them up again. The game lacks the humor and the puzzles that the previous games had. At least it lacks them to a certain extent. Remember how I said that Monkey Island 3 failed a bit when it did the puzzle with the snake-eating Guybrush and then the quicksand? Well, Escape from Monkey Island falls even shorter than that. It tries to parody Mortal Kombat. There's a bit of the game called Monkey Combat where it's essentially a completely non-funny and totally non-interesting version of insult sword fighting. You run around an island fighting some monkeys, trying to figure out which part of the randomly generated ook-ak-ik-ook combination of attacks is useful against what other combination of ik-ook-ook-ak combination of attacks. It's like they looked at the insult sword fighting in the previous game and thought themselves, you know what would make this even better? If we kept the general gameplay of the thing where you run around and slowly collect a knowledge base of what works against what, but remove all of the humor from it. Leave the tediousness, leave the repetition, remove what actually made it good, what actually made it rewarding. This would have worked as a one-off joke, like you do it once and that's it. That's what To the Moon does with its combat system. You meet a squirrel, it initiates combat mode, one of your characters throws a shoe at the squirrel, and then it never actually does anything again in the game. It never shows up, it is never mentioned. It is there once as a joke and it worked in To the Moon. And To the Moon is not a comedy. Escape from Monkey Island is a comedy, and it absolutely blows that aspect. Which is a shame because at the beginning, when you're doing insult arm wrestling, you already have all of the lines that you collected in the previous game already memorized. You already have most of the insults and most of the responses already there, and it's your job to figure out exactly which of them blend best together. It's a short scene, and it works. It's an homage to insult sword fighting without actually having, insult sword fighting in it. You have insult arm wrestling, and you don't have the tediousness of redoing all the insults and responses step. But they added Monkey Combat. And I got a bit of an inkling, like a bit of an idea. It's because they wanted to, make it seem a bit more actiony so they could sell it better on consoles. Now, I'm basing this mostly on what other publishers did to their adventure games that are on. Stuff like Dreamfall that added combat, pointless combat for no reason to, make it seem like it would sell better on consoles. I'm probably wrong, but it's a feature that should not have been there. Adding combat that's devoid of humor. Okay, there are some visual gags with Hadoukens and stuff, but there's no wit there. There's no intelligence. There's no spark of Monkey Island creativity. And that spark is sort of faded in a lot of places in the game. The game, probably it's because it's 3D, it's that early, not even early 3D. We had 3D like for a lot of years. We had 3D since before Monkey Island 3. For God's sake, this was 2 years after Half-Life. But there was still an awkwardness to the way everything worked in that 3D-ish type setting. A slowness, a jankiness, a non-cohesiveness, and that's not because of the 3D technology, it's because of the way the game was made, where things just don't line up, where you will find dialogue that doesn't fit with other dialogue, where you'll find bits of the game that are just kind of nonsensical and broken. As a friend pointed out recently, what's the reason that you eventually do try and spray a platypus with some cologne in Ozymandias' song? Well, it's to piss off Ozymandias, but why would you piss him off like that instead of, I don't know, make fun of his accent or something? It adds a few layers of extra mental gymnastics that makes it even less fun to play than the previous one, because the payoff usually isn't as good as the previous one had, or any of the previous ones had. Again, not to say that there aren't funny bits in the game, there aren't funny moments, there aren't things that will make you smile and feel joy. You get to shoot Guybrush at one point with another Guybrush because you sort of break time at one point. Actually, I didn't shoot him because I forgot that you could do that in the capture you're seeing on the background. But the spark's not there. And it's probably because, well, the game is again made by people that never worked on Monkey Island. Not even by the people that worked on the previous one. It's so far removed from Monkey Island that it becomes mostly just an adventure game. And mind you, this was in the fading years of the popularity of adventure games, when you needed to go big or go home. It's when we got the magnificent The Longest Journey, which has funny moments in it, but is a lot more serious of a game. And it too uses that mix of 2D and 3D, but it does it with, mouse support, so it's kind of better. Monkey Island 4, well, it's not called Monkey Island 4. Monkey Island 2 was the only one with the number in it after all. Escape from Monkey Island didn't need to exist. I'm not unhappy that it does. I just wish it could have been better. It does do its best to try out some unique things. I mean, the ending is a fight between giant robots, and it does deal with some subjects that you didn't think you'd find in a Monkey Island game. Such as, well, there's a bit of self-awareness in it that goes beyond it knowing that it's just a game. There's a bit of self-awareness in the status of the series, of it being a fourth part of a series that maybe has gone on too long. You find that in Planet Threepwood, which is a bar made in the name of Guybrush Threepwood, without his approval, without his knowledge, without any of his consent, but it's filled with his life. And a LucasArts mug that Guybrush comments that they have their hands in everything. There's a small ember there that the game knows exactly what it is. That it is kitsch. That it is tacky. That's not enough to actually make it a great game, or to make it a good Monkey Island game. On its own, it's a nice enough adventure game. Compared to the previous three, however, it is severely lacking. Not saying it's a must play, but it's at least a curiosity that may warrant some affection from fans of the series. Not a lot of it, but it's at least nice to visit Melee Island again. Now rendered with somehow less detail than you saw it in the original version from almost 30 years ago. And it's nice to see that map of the Caribbean that always makes you wonder, am I gonna get to sail everywhere I want to? Like in the previous game, just move the ship around and no, you're never gonna do that. Much like the log flume of the damned, the journey is pretty fine and a bit nonsensical. But at least you get to throw a duck at somebody, and that never gets old. We come at last to Tales of Monkey Island. It had been 9 years since Escape from Monkey Island. 9 long years. It only took 3 years between The Curse of Monkey Island and Escape, and it took, well, 6 years between LeChuck's Revenge and The Curse of Monkey Island. This was 9 years. This was a long time. This was a different company, though Dave Grossman, one of the people that made the first two Monkey Island games, was there, and Ron Gilbert did come to visit once in a while, but for the most part, Telltale's attempt at making a Monkey Island game was as far removed in terms of the people who worked on the originals as possible. And that really shows, because this is a fundamentally different game than all the others were. And not just because it was both 3D and had mouse controls, which was a new thing, but also because it was episodic and it had fundamentally different values than the previous ones had. One thing I can say about the previous games is that they all were in the same vein as the original Monkey Island. A thoroughly silly game that, when you break it right down, was kind of pointless. There was no weight in pretty much anything you did. It was just a comedic romp, a frivolous adventure, a game that was just about laughing at things constantly. But Telltale doesn't really, well, how should I put this? Telltale had a bit of a habit. One that I'd say, I can't really remember exactly the timeline, but I think it started with Sam & Max. Or should I say it ended with Sam & Max, or started with the end of Sam & Max. If you haven't played Telltale's interpretation of Sam & Max, well, firstly you should. They're quite okay adventure games. But near the end, they become something else. They go for the gut. They take a cartoon rabbit and a talking dog. I'm not sure if Max is a rabbit. He's a rabbit thing. But they take those characters, that concept of ludicrousness that defies reason, logic, and social norms, and gives it a bittersweet ending. Where, if you kind of think about it, one of the characters that you've been playing with for years is dead. Irrecoverably dead. Oh, it sweeps it under the floor with humor, with cartoon ludicrousness, but for a while, it goes right for the jugular. And actually, I think I may have my timeline wrong. Tales of Monkey Island did start this, and Sam & Max was just collateral damage, because it was Telltale's attempt at crafting their own style. And this is Telltale's trademark, one that they have used to superb effect in the Walking Dead adventure game series. That is non-stop feeling, emotion, pain. A series that has been ongoing for 6 years. It's all about making you feel sad, making you empathize with these characters, with their suffering. And that's not Monkey Island, is it? That's not what the series is about. But they made it about that. Even though Dave Grossman did contribute to some of the scripts, he did write at least 2 of the episodes, and Ron Gilbert was on occasion there to say, oh yeah, I like that bit. Can I have my series back? And this says no. This succession of episodes was written by people that had different sensibilities than the ones that created Monkey Island and the ones that wrote the previous 2 games. They were more about emotion, more about developing characters, more about, well, drama, more about moments that will make you feel sad. And in a way, that is, it depends on exactly what you expect from Monkey Island. If you wanted it to be what Monkey Island was, again, a fun romp through the Caribbean, a nonsensical adventure with rubber chickens and pulley in the middle, with really funny, superbly witty dialogue, where pretty much nothing is taken seriously, where the main character kind of commits horrible acts quite often and it's never really punished for them. Okay, I do think he murdered that guy in Monkey Island 3. Well then, Tales is not that kind of game. On the surface, it may still seem like it's funny and, witty, and it's not super witty. It has what I would call moments of wit. The moment when Guybrush meets Morgan Le Fay for the first time and he's about to insult, sword duel her, and before he can say, well, you fight like a cow, she chops his arm off. That was gold. That was perfect. That was subverting expectations in a funny way. Because if you've played the series up until now, you know that insult sword fighting is usually how things get resolved. And if you've played the games back to back, it is very, very played out. It's not really what you call something that has a lot of longevity. So the first time you try to use it, you get your hand chopped off. Simple and to the point. That is wit. And the series does bring it back at the end, where you're fighting two people at the same time using insult sword fighting, but you actually need to use encouragement sword fighting and insult sword fighting at the same time. But there's no component of you actually having to collect the answers, you have them already, so it doesn't really have the baggage of having to rethread ground again. It just has the payoff and a slight puzzle there where you have to figure out what fits where. I thought it was a fine puzzle, one that fit, one that worked. It sort of revitalized insult sword fighting by giving it a new shape, a new form, a new purpose, while acknowledging that it completely disregards it. But the rest of the game, well, it's not that clever, and it can be exemplified in many ways. Again, you have the classic puzzle where Guybrush is trapped to a place that he can get out of, and there's all those things around him that can probably be used to help him escape, but he can never reach them. How does he get out of this? How does he get out of the snake? How does he get out of the water? Well, the puzzle here is just a puzzle. It involves a magnetic monkey named Jacques. Oh sure, it's funny, it's ludicrous, I'd say, but it's not Monkey Island. It's not breaking the fourth wall so hard that you remember, oh right, this is a game. I can actually have fun here. But it does try and bring it back a few times by, well, you have to direct another character in such a way that you're basically giving them hints on how to play an adventure game by using the verbalist from the old Monkey Island games. So there's always this sort of slight inkling that maybe it'll get it. But it never does it? Can't say it never does. It still follows the same recipe as the previous games. But you have to build something out of crap you find around. But in terms of the wit, the design, the point, it is very far removed from the original's intent. It is a copy of an impression, of a description, of an artist's rendering of Monkey Island. That still makes it a fun adventure game on its own, but not really a great Monkey Island. But then we come to the different bit, the Telltale bit. It's a game that tries to have heart. It's a game where you meet a character called Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay is a Monkey Island fan. She's a Guybrush Threepwood fan. She's someone that idolized Guybrush Threepwood as being the greatest pirate in the world. Someone that grew up with Guybrush as her hero, dreaming only to one day be able to clash swords with him. There's a bit of commentary there on nostalgia, on meeting your heroes, and on realizing that maybe they're not that great. Which is a total lie, because Monkey Island 1 and 2 were absolutely fantastic, some of the best games ever made. But maybe, just maybe, they also had flaws that, let's say, we overlook. Not that that actually makes Tales of Monkey Island better. What does make it better is that its attempt to create that heartfelt connection with the characters, even the ones that it introduces right here in this series that have no relation to the rest of it, that works. That actually succeeds. And it does so because it's not directed like a Monkey Island game at all. And I don't mean just because it's 3D. Escape was 3D, and it still had a lot of Monkey Island spunk in it, if I can say so, especially in its cinematics. Its cinematics were just so energetic, so full of life that it really sort of oversold the rest of the game. But here we have sequences like two characters in a boat not talking to each other, just occasionally glancing at one another, and that tells you a lot about their relationship, about their current status. This in the game series about an evil voodoo theme park under an island with volcanoes and doofy dog. There's a bit of a whiplash there, but it pulls it off in my opinion. And that makes Tales of Monkey Island actually stand out more than Escape. It gives it an identity that is really its own. Yeah, it's a Monkey Island game, but it's that Monkey Island game. It's also a Monkey Island game that had, well, let's put it like this. Telltale had really big troubles in its earlier days with the budgets and with time constraints. Basically, it had very little of either, and that really shows in the fact that most of the characters look exactly alike, since they most use the exact same model, slightly tweaked. A lot of things that were supposed to go into the game were kind of cut because, well, they couldn't find it in the budget to actually do it, or they didn't have the time because, well, this was an episodic series and had to be launched in a sort of, episodic way and not a year later, Valve. And because of that structure, because of those limitations, the game did suffer in presentation, especially. The later games, the later episodes, became a bit better in terms of how the characters looked and moved and acted. Apart from Guybrush, they turned Guybrush into Zach Braff from Scrubs, where he goes on about grogatinis. Well, at least they give him his beard back. Anyway, I think that Tales of Monkey Island is the best game they could have done with the people they had and the resources they had. The very limited resources and the style that they were making games back then in hopes of gaining some profitability. And I think this is a first, but, well, not a first because Escape sold unexpectedly well in Germany. But Tales of Monkey Island did exceed expectations, which honestly isn't saying much because Dave Grossman, he was at LucasArts back then and sort of knows the games never sold, so probably they would not expect a lot. And then the studio did come out with that Walking Dead series that sold millions and still does. And still, in spite of the shortcomings of the budget and, well, everything else, it was varied. It moved you from place to place. You got to visit the inside of a giant manatee, and you got a story that tries to delve a bit deeper into Monkey Island, into the characters, into the lore, onto everything. It explores the idea of, well, what if LeChuck is only evil because of the voodoo, and he has the voodoo because of the voodoo lady? What if she's the villain? What if there's this other character that's on a similar journey to Guybrush, but coming from the other side, like from not wanting to be a pirate, but a pirate hunter? What would happen if they collided? What would happen if Guybrush turned evil? What would happen if Guybrush died and became, as LeChuck was, a ghost zombie pirate? Well, not a demon, but eventually, undead. And that way it honestly always felt to me a bit like fan fiction. Good fan fiction. Don't get me wrong. Fan fiction can be good. I've written some. I wouldn't call the Battletoads one good. I think the Diablo one is okay. Probably the Elemental one is the game. But that's besides the point. It feels more like fan fiction because it explores the characters a lot from that perspective, from that of a fan. And in a way, there is even a insert of the fan in the form of Morgan Le Fay. Though it is done, again, in a very, very good way. And in the end, for what it tries to do, it works. But it's just not, well, it's not Monkey Island proper. Though to be fair, it probably hasn't been Monkey Island proper for a while now. The Curse was very close. The Curse was super close. Escape drifted away and, well, this one drifted even farther. But at least it drifted in its own direction that, even though it does try to make callbacks to older things, it does have its core of originality, and that I can always respect. Also, the game is set technically after Monkey Island 5, after fictional Monkey Island 5 that doesn't actually exist and somehow involved some monkeys of Montevideo or something, and LeChuck as a demon walrus. 5 games. Monkey Island has 0 presence outside of the games. There is no comics, there is no novels, there is no web comics even, there's no, well, there was a play made by fans, it was very nice, I saw it, it's on YouTube I think, but there are no other materials to expand the world, the lore or anything, because there needn't be. The whole idea of Monkey Island was that it was a game, and when I say that I mean that being a game was fundamental to its existence, to its identity. Translating it in other forms, non-interactive forms, ones where you just are a spectator, don't really work as well. Continuing it in such a form would really not work as well. Retelling it, maybe, yeah. They could probably do a Monkey Island movie, other than the Pirates of the Caribbean. They did try to make a Monkey Island movie once. It didn't really take off, but suddenly, look, there's the Pirates of the Caribbean. It sort of has a lot of similarities to it. What a coinkydink. If you're interested in playing Tales of Monkey Island, I think some of the episodes are free. I think the first one was free when I got it, like 8 years ago. I think it still may be free if you have a Telltale account. Though the first episode may not be the best one, or the second one. Honestly, it sort of starts shining with the third one, mostly because it takes place in Amenity, and the fourth one as well, where you get to assist at the trial of Guybrush Threepwood that now has to finally pay for all the crimes he committed. Or didn't. I mean, he's accused by a bunch of pirates who are basically lowlives themselves. I'd say that on their own, the episodes are enjoyable enough. If you really like navigating a lot of mazes, because they couldn't think of anything better that could fit in the games in the amount of RAM that they had available for the Wii. Yeah, there's a whole joke about Club 41 in the game, because you can't have 42 megs of RAM occupied on a Wii because you can't. So that's why it's called Club 41. Now you know. So, this is the end, isn't it? Or at least it was in the original version of this video, but things have changed a lot in these last 4 years. There's a new Monkey Island game out today. You can go and play it. It's made by Ron Gilbert. You can now return to Monkey Island. And who knows, maybe someday I'll add it to this collection of videos and make a complete history of the Monkey Island series. A series that has been going on for 30 years. And in all that time, it continues to be, most of all, beloved in some way by everybody who's ever played it. 30 years. And I didn't even get a lousy t-shirt.